The champagne flutes clinked like tiny bells across the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers scattered light over 300 guests, all dressed in their finest. I stood near the back wall, holding a gift I'd bought with next month's rent money, watching my younger sister Delilah spin in her custom gown. The band played something expensive and orchestrated. My father climbed the stage, microphone in hand, and raised his glass high. "To our precious daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We couldn't be more proud of the woman she's become." My mother dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief. The room erupted in applause. I clapped too, alone in my corner, wearing a dress I'd owned for 5 years. Nobody looked my way. Not once. It was like I wasn't there at all. Later that night, I sat in my tiny kitchen with the lights off. The paper bag of leftover hors d'oeuvres my mother handed me sat unopened on the counter. My fiancé, Byron, made tea without asking if I wanted any. He just knew. He placed the cup in front of me and sat down, taking my cold hand in his. "They really meant it," I whispered into the silence. "I don't exist to them." Byron squeezed my fingers but didn't argue. He'd seen it too. The way they looked past me at family dinners. The way my name was never mentioned in their holiday letters. I stared at my tea and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Just a quiet, aching realization that I'd been invisible my entire life. My name is Talia, and I used to believe that being quiet and kind was enough. I was the firstborn, the careful one, the daughter who never asked for anything. Delilah came 3 years later, loud and golden and impossible to ignore. She got ballet lessons while I got library books. She got family vacations while I got permission to stay home. When she announced her engagement, my parents celebrated for weeks. They spent $87,000 on her wedding. Imported flowers, live band, custom invitations with gold foil. When I got engaged 6 months later, I waited for my mother to ask about dates or dresses. Instead, she sighed over coffee and said, "We're emotionally and financially tapped out, Talia. You understand." I nodded and said I did. I always said I did. I didn't fight it. I thanked them politely and went back to work. I run a small florist shop in the old part of town, the kind of place tourists walk past without noticing. The paint peels near the door, and the sign is crooked, but inside it smells like roses and eucalyptus. I keep it warm. That same week, an elderly man came in shaking from the cold. His wife had died 3 months earlier, and he wanted a bouquet for her grave. I made him one with white lilies and lavender, the kind she used to grow. He cried into the petals right there at the counter. I didn't charge him. He left with trembling hands and a whispered thank you. I locked up that night and thought about kindness, about whether it ever came back. I started working longer hours after that. Every dollar I earned went into a blue tin I kept behind the register. I skipped lunch most days, biked home to save gas money, and began sewing scraps of fabric together at night. I was making a wedding dress I couldn't afford to buy. Byron found me asleep at the kitchen table more than once, needle still in my hand. He never complained. Every night, he left a hot cup of tea beside my sewing kit and a note that said the same thing, "We'll get there." I believed him because I had to. The alternative was too heavy to carry. So I kept stitching, kept saving, kept smiling through family dinners where Delilah talked about her honeymoon in Greece. One rainy afternoon, a woman stumbled into my shop. Her mascara was smudged down her cheeks, and she held her heels in one hand. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. I didn't ask questions. I just sat her down, gave her a warm towel and honey tea, and made her a small bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. "You're safe here," I told her quietly. She stared at the flowers like they were something sacred. After a while, she stood up, smoothed her dress, and left without giving me her name. I watched her disappear into the rain and wondered what kind of pain looked like that. I hoped the flowers helped. I always hoped they helped. 2 weeks later, Delilah announced she was going on a second honeymoon. My parents paid for it without hesitation. "She deserves joy," my mother said over Sunday brunch, like joy was something only certain people earned. I stayed quiet, stirring my coffee until it went cold. That night, I went for a walk through the hills just outside town. I needed air, space, something other than the walls of my shop. That's when I found it, an abandoned greenhouse, half hidden by wild ivy and overgrown grass. The glass was cracked, and the wooden frame sagged in places, but something about it called to me. I stood there until the sun set, imagining what it could become. I visited the greenhouse every day after that. I brought gloves, a broom, trash bags. Byron came with me on weekends, carrying buckets of water and broken glass. We worked in silence mostly, clearing debris and pulling weeds. Nobody knew we were there. It became our secret, ours and the moonlight that poured through the broken roof. One night, I stood in the center of the space and whispered to the cracked walls, "You'll bloom again." Byron heard me and smiled. He didn't think I was crazy. He never did. Slowly, the greenhouse started to look less like a ruin and more like a possibility. I didn't know what I was building yet, but I knew it mattered. One morning, I found a note slid under my shop door. It was written on thick, expensive paper in elegant handwriting, "I know a place where light still lives." There was no name, no return address. Just a location written at the bottom, coordinates that led to the hilltop where the greenhouse stood. My heart stopped. I'd told no one about that place. Not my parents, not my friends. Only Byron knew, and he would never send something like this. I stared at the note for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Someone had been watching. Someone knew. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my apron pocket, my hands shaking slightly. I went to the hill that afternoon. When I arrived, there was a woman there, pruning the wild ivy with careful hands. She was humming softly, something I almost recognized. It was her. The woman from the rainy day, the one who'd cried into my roses. She looked up and smiled like she'd been expecting me. "I've been waiting for you," she said simply. Before I could ask how or why, she handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a sketch, beautifully detailed, of a garden wedding scene. Glass roof, hanging florals, pathways lined with lanterns. My breath caught. "What is this?" I whispered. She didn't answer. She just touched my shoulder gently and walked away, disappearing into the trees before I could follow. She vanished again, leaving no name, no explanation. But when I returned to the greenhouse the next day, things had changed. There were tools waiting for me. Clean gardening gloves, a new set of pruning shears, a ladder. Stacked neatly near the door were panes of glass, brand new and perfectly cut to size. A delivery truck arrived that afternoon with roses from a rare farm up north, varieties I'd only seen in magazines. The driver said everything had been paid for, anonymously. I stood there surrounded by gifts I didn't understand, holding a card that simply read, "Kindness returns." I cried that day, right there in the dirt, because someone had seen me when no one else did. My parents called a few weeks later. "Your cousin Beatrice is getting married next month," my mother said, her voice clipped and businesslike. "Do not wear white. And don't bring Byron. We need to make a good impression, and you know how people talk." I didn't argue. I never did. I just said okay and hung up. That night, Byron and I strung lights across the greenhouse beams. They glowed like fireflies against the glass, soft and golden. "It's beautiful," he whispered, pulling me close. I rested my head on his shoulder and watched the lights flicker. For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. The greenhouse was becoming something real, something mine. Then a storm came. Heavy rain and wind that shook the hills. I woke up to a text from Byron. The greenhouse roof had collapsed. I ran there in my pajamas, rain soaking through my clothes. When I arrived, my heart broke. Weeks of work destroyed. Glass shattered across the ground, beams split and hanging. I sat on the wet floor and cried until I had nothing left. Byron drove me home in silence. I didn't go back the next day. I couldn't. But the day after that, curiosity pulled me back. When I arrived, I froze. The roof wasn't just fixed. It was transformed. A perfect glass dome now arched over the space, elegant and seamless. Who was doing this? The flower shop next door to mine closed down suddenly. The owner retired and moved south. A week later, the landlord called me. "Someone paid the lease for you," he said casually. 5 years up front. You can expand if you want." I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, speechless. "Who paid it?" I asked. He just winked and said, "Someone who thinks you're worth it." I expanded slowly, knocking down a wall, adding new shelves and a bigger workspace. My bouquets started appearing on social media, shared by people I'd never met. Brides requested my arrangements specifically. Orders doubled, then tripled. I didn't tell anyone what was happening. Not even Byron knew the full story. I just kept working, kept wondering, kept waiting. One morning, a package arrived at my door. Inside were wedding invitations, the most beautiful I'd ever seen. Thick paper, hand-pressed with tiny flecks of gold. No names were printed, just elegant calligraphy that read, "You are invited to witness love bloom." Below that, a date, a time, and coordinates that led to the greenhouse. My hands trembled as I held them. These were for my wedding. My wedding that didn't have invitations, didn't have a budget, didn't have anything but hope. I stared at them for a long time, wondering who was writing this story for me. Whoever she was giving me something I'd never had before, visibility. Byron proposed to me again that week. Not because we weren't engaged, but because he wanted to do it right. He made a ring himself, twisting silver wire around dried jasmine from my shop. It was imperfect and beautiful, just like us. "Yes," I said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, again and always." We printed the invitations by hand, writing names carefully in ink. We delivered them ourselves, walking through town, slipping them into mailboxes. I even left one at my parents' house, tucked into their newspaper. My mother called later, confused. "Who's getting married at this place?" she asked. I didn't answer directly. I just said, "You're invited." She paused, then said she'd come. No gift, though. She made that clear. Weeks passed in a blur. My parents called once more to confirm they were coming, but my sister never responded to her invitation. Fine. I stopped waiting for her approval. The night before the wedding, I walked to the greenhouse one last time alone. What I saw took my breath away. It wasn't a greenhouse anymore. It was something out of a dream. Archways wrapped in white silk and trailing vines. Tables set with candles and hand-dyed linens. Lanterns hanging from every beam, waiting to be lit. I stood in the center and turned slowly, taking it all in. This place had been broken. Now it was whole. Just like me. Guests began arriving the next morning. Some came in expensive cars with private drivers. Others walked up the hill from town, neighbors and regular customers from my shop. Even a few journalists showed up, curious about the mysterious venue everyone had been whispering about. My parents arrived midday, blinking in the bright sunlight. A valet opened their car door, and my mother stepped out slowly, looking around with wide eyes. "Welcome to the Eden house," the attendant said warmly. My father frowned. "Is this Talia's wedding?" he asked, confused. The attendant just smiled and gestured toward the entrance. My parents followed, silent and uncertain, as the glass doors swung open before them. The ceremony space was breathtaking. Rows of chairs faced an altar framed by cascading white orchids and roses in shades I'd created myself. My parents were seated near the front by uniformed staff who treated them like royalty. They looked around, whispering to each other, trying to understand how this was possible. My mother touched the flowers on her chair, rare varieties she'd only seen in luxury magazines. A screen lit up at the front of the room, and soft music began to play. Then a woman walked onto the stage, holding a microphone. I saw my mother freeze. It was her. The woman from the flower shop. The one who'd disappeared into the rain. She spoke clearly into the microphone, her voice steady and warm. 3 years ago, she began, I walked into a small flower shop on the worst day of my life. I was ready to disappear. To give up. A stranger gave me a bouquet and told me I was safe. The room went completely silent. That kindness saved me. That moment built this place. And today, it blooms for her. She gestured toward the back, where I stood in my handmade dress, and the crowd turned. Gasps rippled through the guests. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My father stared like he was seeing a ghost. The woman smiled at me, and I felt tears slide down my cheeks. She told them her name then. Seraphine Bellamy. A billionaire investor who disappeared from public life years ago after a breakdown. I walked into Talia's shop ready to vanish, she said, her voice breaking slightly. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't try to fix me. She just saw me. My parents sat frozen, their faces pale. My sister Delilah, had arrived late and was standing near the back, her expression shocked. Seraphine continued, explaining how she'd been watching me for months, anonymously funding the greenhouse, the shop expansion, the wedding. "This is only the beginning," she said. "Talia deserves to be seen." The applause was deafening. My mother looked like she might faint. I walked down the aisle slowly, savoring every step. My dress was made from silk I'd dyed myself using petals from my garden, each shade blending into the next like a sunset. No traditional music played, just the soft sound of wind moving through the glass dome above us. The guests rose as I passed, cameras flashing, whispers spreading. My mother was crying quietly, her makeup running. My father couldn't meet my eyes. Byron waited for me at the altar, his face full of love and pride. When I reached him, he took my hands and whispered, "You're radiant." I believed him. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. After the ceremony, I gave a short speech. I thanked everyone who came, thanked Seraphine for the extraordinary gift she'd given me, and thanked Byron for never doubting me. Then I turned to face my parents. The room went quiet. "I forgive you," I said simply. "Not because you've asked for it, but because I need to let it go. I was never invisible. You just refused to look." My mother covered her mouth with her hand, sobbing. My father looked down at his lap. Delilah stood near the wall, pale and silent. I didn't wait for their response. I turned back to Byron, took his hand, and smiled. The room erupted in applause again, but this time it wasn't for show. It was real. Seraphine found me during the reception. "I have a proposal," she said, leading me to a quiet corner. She explained her plan, a foundation that funds creatives who help others through beauty and kindness. Artists, florists, musicians, anyone whose work makes the world gentler. "I want you to be my partner," she said. "This greenhouse is just the beginning. We'll build more. We'll help more people." I stared at her, overwhelmed. "Why me?" I asked. She smiled. "Because you gave when you had nothing. That's rare." I didn't answer right away. I looked across the room at Byron, at the guests laughing and dancing, at my parents sitting quietly in the corner. Then I looked back at Seraphine and nodded. Yes. I returned to my flower shop the next day. Same creaky door, same crooked sign, same sunlight streaming through the window. But everything felt different. Letters started arriving from strangers, people who'd heard about the wedding or seen photos online. They shared stories about how one small act of kindness had changed their lives. A woman who'd received free flowers during her divorce. A teenager I'd helped with a prom corsage when his mom couldn't afford it. I read every letter carefully, feeling the weight of what I'd built without trying. I didn't post about it or brag. I just kept arranging flowers, kept showing up, kept giving. Because kindness blooms where no one looks. And I'd spent my whole life learning how to bloom in the dark.